Queen Elizabeth II's wardrobe is one of the most important fashion archives in the United Kingdom. It's a very large archive because it spans her entire life. Today we're going to be looking at some pieces which illustrate the transition from childhood as a young princess through to adulthood and becoming queen. These dresses are a really fascinating example of Parisian couture in the young princesses' lives. And as you can see, we have two identical dresses. This one was made for Princess Elizabeth and the other one for her younger sister, Princess Margaret. We think they date to about 1938, so Princess Elizabeth would have been 12 years old at the time. And when we look at the detail of the dresses, we see many hallmarks of the designer who made them, Jeanne Lanvin, one of the leading Parisian couturiers, and unusually a woman. Madame Lanvin was very interested in designing for children, and this was because she had a daughter called Marguerite, who was really her inspiration, and even her fashion label for her couture house features a mother and child together. We can see that the dress made of this beautiful gold lame, two tones of gold, which you see contrasting in the padded belt and also around the collar. But we see other features which are typical of Madame Lanvin's designs. For example, these very interesting sleeve shapes, which have top stitching here and a really interesting construction that provides height to the puffed sleeves. The use of lame fabrics was also quite a hallmark of Madame Lanvin's couture in the 1930s. And so these are really miniature, beautiful pieces of couture for two young princesses. When we look at the dresses in detail, we also see examples of wear and tear. And also on Princess Elizabeth's dress, we see that the hem has been extended with an additional panel of lame fabric, obviously because it was much loved and she wanted to continue to wear it. So you're probably wondering why Jeanne Lanvin, why a Parisian couturier was going to be working for the princesses, because as we generally consider it, Princess Elizabeth and later Queen Elizabeth II absolutely focused on patronising British designers and couturiers. Well, the reason for that is because in the 1930s, when Princess Elizabeth was a young woman, their mother, Duchess of York and later Queen Elizabeth, consort of George VI, became quite an important client of Lanvin. And Princess Elizabeth's style was very much influenced by her mother's taste and her mother's approach to fashion. So, for example, she was fascinated by twin dressing, and she would often dress the two princesses in identical or matching clothing. And that, of course, was a fashion which dates back to the 19th century and is often seen in royal dressing. Norman Hartnell, who designed all these three pieces, which date from the late 1940s to the early 1950s, was a leading British couturier. He had established his couture house in the early 1920s at a very young age, and he went on to be one of the most important and influential British couturiers of the next few decades. Princess Elizabeth first learnt about his work through other members of the royal family, and particularly her mother, who was an important client of Hartnell. But she took her fashion choices in their own direction, very much using colour, using cut and using embellishment to influence her style. And Hartnell's ability to design pieces for important occasions, which were both fashion forward but also unique, was the key to his success, and probably the reason why Princess Elizabeth admired him so much and established this very close working relationship with him until his death in 1979. By the late 1940s, Princess Elizabeth was really beginning to establish her own style and take her own direction in terms of her fashion choices. And here we see a beautiful yachting suit, an example of supremely elegant 1940s tailoring. So this is a very fashion-forward piece, which was worn on board HMS Vanguard and specially designed for the tour of South Africa, which Princess Elizabeth undertook with her parents, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, in February of that year. And this was the tour during which she made her famous 21st birthday speech. This suit is a very special piece because King George VI, in fact, had some involvement because it was him that gave permission for the genuine naval buttons to be included as part of this yachting suit. And Hartnell actually noted this in his autobiography, and he also said that the king would insist that the buttons should be removed afterwards and replaced with plain ones, but evidently that didn't happen. But the care and attention that has gone into the weight of the fabric, which is a mixture of cotton, linen, and with some wool, would have been perfect for the climate in South Africa. And it has these beautiful tailored details around the collar and also on the pockets. And the skirt is specially weighted to prevent it from flying up. The pleats at the front mean that it's very easy to move in. And when we look at this suit, we see a very clear example of tailoring from the mid to late 1940s. But contrasted with it, we have this supremely elegant velvet coat, also designed by Norman Hartnell. But as you can see, the silhouette is completely different. And this is because it post-dates Christian Dior's famous New Look collection, which was based on a very nipped-in waist, a padded hip, and very full long skirts. This caused a sensation in the fashion world and influenced many contemporary designers to copy and change their silhouettes to match Christian Dior's. And this is exactly what we see going on here. Hartnell has taken that New Look shape, but made it his own. He doesn't make the skirt of the coat quite so long as Christian Dior would, but we do have this very, very closely fitted and tailored waist. The hips are padded, the pockets are inset to emphasize the shape over the hip, and the whole thing is just a remarkable survival from this late 1940s period. This was a style of coat particularly made up in velvets, which Princess Elizabeth wore throughout the late 1940s and into the early 1950s. And in fact, this coat is one of 4 surviving examples in the collection. This particular example shows us an interesting element, which is the collar was originally fixed with fur. This was obviously designed to be detachable, and we can still see traces of the stitching of where that was held on. But what it does reveal are some interesting little design details. For example, the little stand-up collar at the back. And also we see the seams of the way that the tailoring has been put together. And the whole thing is an absolute masterclass of beautiful British tailoring. Another factor about this coat is the colour. It is such a beautiful, vivid, ruby red colour. And we know from Norman Hartnell's autobiography that Princess Elizabeth made it clear to Hartnell that she wanted to wear darker, stronger colours in this period. And that's certainly what we see here. And this was perhaps to make her clothing stand out from that of her mother, Queen Elizabeth, who preferred to wear softer and more muted shades, also designed by Hartnell. But also perhaps this is the beginning of the Queen understanding how colour could play an important role in her dressing. Contrasting with this beautiful example of Hartnell's tailoring, we move to a piece which transitions the period of the princess becoming queen. We know that Queen Elizabeth II wore this dress in Wellington, New Zealand in 1953 on her post-coronation Commonwealth tour, and there are wonderful photographs of her wearing it and looking very, very happy on that occasion. But we've recently discovered that in fact it was made the previous year when she was still Princess Elizabeth, and that's because the original sketch for the dress was discovered in a presentation album of sketches which Norman Hartnell gave to Princess Elizabeth in 1952. It was made for the tour which the Princess undertook with the Duke of Edinburgh via Kenya on their way to Australia and New Zealand. But in fact, of course, that tour, as we know, was curtailed by the death of the King and Princess Elizabeth becoming Queen Elizabeth II. When we look at the details of this dress, we see some of the hallmarks of Hartnell's couture. At first, we notice something which is very fashion-forward for the early 1950s. This one-shouldered silhouette, which terminates in a beautiful streamer of silk tulle with lace, this tightly fitted bodice, and the beautiful full skirt are elements of that silhouette, which was so typical of what Princess Elizabeth was wearing at the time. But also we look at the embellishment and the construction of the piece. The dress itself is made of a beautiful gold lame, which has a sheen, but this is overlaid completely by a layer of silk tulle and lace. And the lace is re-embroidered with silver thread, and that makes the pattern stand out and provides this overall incredibly elegant but eye-catching design. Through the pieces that we've seen, we see an interesting transition from a young princess wearing Parisian couture right the way through to the rise of Norman Hartnell and that key relationship he was to form with Her late Majesty in her fashion choices. We see this directional movement from very slim-fitting tailoring of the 1940s through to the impact of the new look, and then the establishment of this incredibly elegant silhouette for evening wear. And these were to become the hallmarks of the Queen's fashion choices for many decades to come.